To Travel Photos by Bob and Ruth Byler on 11 tours to 35 countries and scenic locations. Each slideshow opened video travelogues that we did together. The photos are narrated with a music background. This video is presented as a tribute and celebration of the life of Ruth Byler, my wonderful wife for 55 years and partner in our photography ventures. What wonderful memories we have from the land of the Maya jazz cruise in Caribbean waters in January 1995. We saw Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. We shopped and snorkeled, saw beautiful scenery, ate lots of good food, and heard 3 great jazz bands play. This 10-minute segment shows more than 100 color photos to preview the videotape memories that follow. The adventure began in Cozumel, the famous Mexican resort, where we had some time to see the plaza downtown. There were many shops where interesting souvenirs were sold, and some restaurants, one of which we visited for some liquid refreshment. The music in the background, by the way, is by the Fulton Street Jazz Band. Down at the beach we saw resort hotels, and there were the thatched roofs of an outdoor cafe. In the background here is the Regent Spirit, which was to be our home for the next 7 days. An early activity on board was a life jacket drill. Luckily, we never had to use them. Pulling away from the ship at Belize, we headed out to a snorkeling adventure on a tiny, uninhabited island. The waters were pretty smooth that day, and the cruisers enjoyed a trip with the wind and the spray in their faces. We stopped for a photo, and this is yours truly and his beautiful wife. And then we had snorkeling instructions, and then we enjoyed the beautiful reefs and tropical fish at the island of Goff's Cay. Then we went to the city of Belize City, and we had about an hour to walk through the streets, and it had some attractive dwellings. And a very pretty little river that runs to the sea under a downtown bridge. And there were some houses that were very much in need of rehabilitation. One bulletin board offered a health message. Beautiful coleus and other flowers were found as we got back toward the dock to catch our tender back to the ship. And there also was a friendly bar. Beautiful skies welcomed us to Guatemala, where we visited the picturesque town of Santo Tomas de Castilla. The animals roam the streets right along with the people and vehicles there. Many cruisers found bargains at the marketplace, where arts and crafts and bright-colored textiles and clothing are displayed.
Leather belts, silver items.
Some tips on what to buy and how to wear it were given by a tour leader. Mayan Indian families come down from the hills to sell their goods when cruise ships are in town. We admired the beauty of the Mayan people, and we filled up a suitcase of beautiful items bought here and had to take extra luggage back home. A gorgeous sunset at sea was matched perhaps by the Honduran island of Roatan, where we took a bus to the Fantasy Island Resort. This is a great place to loaf in a hammock under friendly palm trees. Clear waters, tropical fish, and a sandy beach were very much enjoyed. Native singers and conga drummers and young dancers also entertained us. Other attractions near the beach included boats at a nearby marina, and kayakers and a windsurfer in the little bay by the beach. A long bus ride then took us to Copan to see the magnificent Mayan ruins that are also shown on Honduran currency. We were greeted by this colorful bird at the entrance. It was friendly also. Our tour guide explained the significance of this site, which is called the Paris of the New World for its artistic structures and carvings. Reconstruction has been going on for decades, and many items are yet to be displayed in what can only guess were original locations. Here is a carving of a god overlooking a plaza, and here is the ball field as seen from above. Copan ruins include a hieroglyphic staircase that dates back to the 8th century and carvings of gods and animals. The shorter structures are altars, and the taller columns with carvings are stelae. There was also a playful coatimundi who romped among the tourists. Some close-ups of the art are shown here in pairs of vertical structures. We will not soon forget this visit to the archaeological past of the amazing Mayans. Food displays on the Regent Spirit also were wonderfully artistic. Faces and animals and flowers were carved from watermelons and various fruits and vegetables, almost looking too good to eat. Here are flowers carved from onions. An ice sculpture was displayed along with a bird on a watermelon. The artist, a chef from the Philippines, demonstrated his creations so cruisers could learn how to do them also. I might call him the Picasso of pineapples. But I wonder how many of us can equal this culinary artistry. The ship couldn't dock at Cancun because of heavy seas, so we stayed at Playa del Carmen on Saturday instead. This is a clean and beautiful town with nice restaurants and shops full of arts and crafts. We got to interview a couple of the shop owners there, and it was a very enjoyable stop, and we'd like to go back. At evening by the beach, we enjoyed an outdoor cafe. And there is surfboard art in the sand. And here you'll see the Regent Spirit on the background. And there is yet one more of those wonderful Caribbean sunsets awaiting before our cruise finally comes to an end. Our videotape record of the cruise will begin at as musicians say after a great session, man, wasn't that a gas? Our 2-week tour in Australia took us to 5 cities: the Barrier Reef, Blue Mountains, and Rainforest. Musical delights were provided by the natural gas and Australian players. Here's a montage in living black and white of players with whom we toured. And there's Bob and Warren and Phil and Carl, Ed, Pete, and Dave. We didn't know much about wombats before this, but we call this the Wombat Tour, and we learned about a hot wombat band. This artwork is from a calendar, and it was provided by the band leader, Kevin Keel. Our group gathered for a picture at a point across from the famous Sydney Opera House. And after this, you'll see a sequence of 164 photos taken on the tour. Music by the Natural Gas Jazz Band is in the background. Our Qantas flight crossed the date line, and we arrived at the Ibis Hotel in Sydney late on June 29th. After the first of many great breakfasts, we got on a bus to see the city. Our first stop was at Mrs. Macquarie's Point, and we had wonderful views of the famous Sydney Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, and the skyline of this clean and modern city. An art museum and cathedral were seen along the bus route. We arrived at Sydney Cove, admired the sailing boats, and we saw the Opera House again as we cruised the harbor on a paddle wheel boat. Downtown buildings, mansions on the waterfront, other boats passing by, and a lighthouse were among the sights. New views of the Opera House were offered as we cruised under the Harbor Bridge, and then we came. The views of Sydney from the Center Point Tower were breathtaking. It's the tallest structure in the southern hemisphere. It was only a short walk from downtown Sydney back to the hotel, and we enjoyed watching the monorail trains rounding a bend at Darling Harbour. Natural gas played 4 times in the Sydney area. We also heard the Zenith Jazz Band, and natural gas members posed with the legendary Graham Bell. Beautiful stained glass, an animated clock tower exhibit, and carriage of pure jade were among the attractions in the Queen Victoria building. Walking back to the hotel, we saw these bird sculptures near the monorail bridge. Seagulls and Chinese sculpture greeted us at the Darling Harbor Entertainment Area. Its big music festival lasted 2 months. We heard a marching band, a youth swing band, and blues singer, Margie Baker. Spirits were elevated as we went to the Blue Mountains, and we saw the Three Sisters formation and some beautiful parrots and other birds at a feeder. The Katoomba Railway is the steepest in the world, and we enjoyed the ride. We also saw a waterfall and a walk in the woods. And the Three Sisters Fountain. We finally saw our first wombat at the wildlife park, as well as koalas, kangaroos, and wallabies. The animals were rather calm that day. Maybe they needed some music by the band to perk them up. A crocodile also was sunning by a small pond, and a shark sculpture reminded us of Jaws. Bernie, Phil, and David posed near the bus. And then we headed to Canberra, where hungry pelicans greeted us, and we also toured the Parliament building. We saw pictures of Queen Elizabeth and other notables, the famous tapestry. And then we drove around town and saw these artwork and a tall monument, and toured the huge War Memorial building, which was filled with exhibits. We stopped downtown for lunch, and then it was back to the Ibis Hotel at Sydney, where we admired its sandstone walls. We stayed one night at the Ocean Blue Resort at Surfers Paradise, and we admired the flowers and the birds and the ocean on a stroll around town. This is a big tourist area with high-rise condominiums and hotels. Kevin Q and Jim Mills played intermissions at a Gold Coast Society concert. Pete and Carl and Ed and Dave are also seen here. A river cruise in the Gold Coast area was enjoyed by our group. And a bungee jump was among the sights. Then in downtown Surfers Paradise, we saw everything from the Condom Kingdom to T-Shirt City and other shops. Sandstone art caught our attention near the ocean. And this fountain sculpture and sheep and koala souvenirs downtown. We also had a one-night stand at Brisbane, where we saw this bridge and natural colored stone and a mountainside overlook. At the Brisbane Jazz Club, drummer Warren Perry met 11 of his Australian cousins. We settled in for 4 days at the beautiful Colonial Club Resort at Cairns. And the restaurants and shops at the pier were very appealing. A train took us through the rainforest to Karanda, where we heard the Jabugai dancers. The market here was outstanding. We also saw big fruit bats in nearby trees. Most of us got back on the bus loaded with packages from the shops in this location. The Quicksilver jet boat took us to the outer edge of the Barrier Reef, and we enjoyed socializing on board. We saw a few fish and lots of coral from the observation deck and in a glass-sided semi-submersible boat. The color here comes from the glass in the water. Some people also learn to scuba dive at the reef pontoon. We watched the wake from the boat jets and enjoyed a marvelous sunset as we returned to Cairns in the evening. The band played 2 concerts at Cairns, and Aussie musicians joined in a jam session at the resort. These photos are from that event, and some will be used with my article in the Mississippi Rag. Our final cruise took us to Green Island on the Inner Barrier Reef. We took a walk in the woods and on the path along the shore. The coral was very visible from the glass-bottom boat, and the fish had a feeding frenzy when the food was tossed onto the water. Back at the Colonial Club Resort, we enjoyed the beautiful lionfish and the others in the aquarium there. We took a last look at the poolside patio before leaving home on July 12th. We crossed the date line again, so also got home on July 12th. Yours truly, Ruth Byler and Bob Byler, enjoyed this great tour and hope you like these pictures and the videotapes that follow. Massive ice formations enchanted our eyes, and sounds of hot jazz by 5 bands captured our ears on the Jazz Sea Alaska cruise in July 1996. In the next 9 minutes, you will see 100 photos from this wonderful journey. The cruise began at Seward on the Holland America's Noordam with more than 1,200 passengers. We cruised College Fjords and the Valdez Narrows, which we might call Glacier Alley. Some cruisers got to fly over and walk on glaciers on various special tours that were offered. Alaska has more than 100,000 glaciers, and we enjoyed those we saw here. Many icebergs were calved from the glaciers we saw. An early activity aboard was a life jacket drill, and we enjoyed visiting with Jazz Sea cruise operators Carol and Bob Newman. Small shops were set up on the dock at Valdez. It is the state's most northern ice-free port, and the Alaska pipeline ends there. We saw a stuffed bear at the visitor center, fireweed, flowers, wood carvings, and hospitable watering places. The city was badly damaged and was rebuilt 4 miles west at the port area after the huge 1964 earthquake. Excellent weather on our voyage enabled the ship to enter Yakutat Bay for a close look at the famous Hubbard Glacier. The face rises 500 feet and is more than 6 miles across. Glaciers are in motion constantly, retreating or advancing, mostly retreating. But the Hubbard Glacier advanced a mile in the 1980s and sealed the mouth of the Russell Fjord and created a big lake. Great jazz was played on 5 bands. Buck Creek from Washington, D.C., Climax from Toronto, Devil Mountain from Oakley, California area, Fulton Street from Sacramento, and Grand Dominion of Vancouver, and several U.S. cities. Members of 3 bands also had a jam session. Sitka was our next stop, and we went ashore in Tenders because it doesn't have a deep water port. Many small boats were there, and a man caught a salmon off the pier just as we arrived. Historic attractions in the city include an old canoe and artwork in various places. Labrador greeted us on the dock. and St. Michael's Cathedral, and another historic house that's been made into a gallery. We also saw the famous Russian cemetery and the graves there, and in the back was a Russian tower on a hill. St. Peter's by the Sea is an Episcopal church, and we walked the neighborhoods and saw the houses there, watched a funeral procession, and saw many more handsome birds in an interesting park. Russian and Tlingit Indian dances will be seen on the video later. The U.S. bought Alaska from Russia in 1867. The transfer was made at Sitka, and it was a territory capital for the next 45 years. After an interesting day in town, we took the tenders back to the Nordam to cruise overnight to Juneau. Alaska's capital is hemmed in by mountains and can be reached only by air or sea. Juneau has many shops along the waterfront and attractive art on the sides of buildings. Many cruisers also enjoyed refreshments, decorations, and music in the ambience of the historic Red Dog Saloon. This 30-year-old totem was seen on a bus tour, and we learned that it took 5 years to carve. Our tour went to the Mendenhall Glacier, one of 38 in the Juneau ice fields. It is receding about 50 feet a year, so it could be gone in 2,000 years, or it might begin advancing again. It created a lake that is 200 feet deep in some places. Glacial ice is very dense and traps compressed air that crackles. It took all day for this small chunk of ice to melt. We also saw a lakeside chapel and thousands of salmon by a bridge. The eagle was in the Alaska State Museum, and video views will be shown later. More totems and flowers and Russian art and crafts were seen downtown, as well as the Juneau trolley cars. Fine shows were offered by singers and dancers on the ship, and bingo games were played in the main lounge. Guest clarinetist Bob Dryga and Bob Baker serenaded people at dinner. Hotel manager Dirk Van Wyk also met Dirk Van Wyk and his wife Mary from Vancouver. A light rain greeted us at Ketchikan, where a sign announces that the city gets more than 200 inches of liquid sunshine annually. We toured the infamous Bordello Road on the boardwalks of Creek Street and saw a city panorama on a tram ride up a steep hill. There was a wonderful display of 6 totems atop that hill. Carving totems is not an ancient art, by the way. It only began in Alaska after European tools arrived there in the late 1800s. The figures on these totems were so alive that we almost expected them to speak to us. A fish hatchery operates by a park at Ketchikan, and lifelike models show the forms and changing colors of various types of salmon. Totems that date back 100 years or more are preserved and explained at the Totem Heritage Center. And visitors may travel there in a horse-drawn trolley. Expensive porcelain art and Russian nesting dolls were seen in shops. And the sourdough bar displayed a tapestry with pool shooting dogs. A pair of bears growled goodbye as we finished our tour of Ketchikan. The jazz players created an exciting finale that won